this video, I'll introduce the new concept of rules in the modeler. Rules create a simple, customized editing interface in the modeler. It can simplify and speed up your modeling process or make it easy for others to manipulate the model. For example, you can control precisely what other members of your team can modify on your model, avoiding drama and lost work. You can write rules based on any existing properties in the property bar. So the properties that you often adjust or always do in seconds are great candidates for rules. If you want to quickly test different variants and keep everything in a single scene, this can be a great way to go. Also, may I add that I am an artist, not an engineer. So my choice of words may seem odd at time to time, but my goal here is to reach a maximum of people and make it understandable, because writing script can be pretty dry. So let's dive into this together. Before we begin, I just want to remind you that we have two samples in the learning section of your installing folder. So first we have the simple conifer. So this is the kind of script that you will find in the models available on the library. So you can buy those directly from us, or you can take a look at the samples and create your own simple rules. So these are very basic things like changing the height, changing the season, randomizing, and also we have options for the canopy like the start angle and everything. And we also have another model that you can find again in the samples. And if we just slide down, we have the oak complex rule. We created this sample with a simple idea in mind. What if we brought the concept of rules to the extreme? What could we achieve with a single scene? This is what we came up with. So this model switches generators, allowing us to grow from a sapling to a full-grown tree, from a field model to a forest one, healthy to dead, and these are just a few of the examples of what you'll find out in the rules section. You can also swap from a games model to a VFX one, but this is very complex. If you take a look at the script, it's extensive, it's kind of complicated, there's a lot of things going on. So for today, we'll come back to the conifer sample and create something that is more in that range of complexity. So a great way to work can be to open our conifer sample and copy the text, the script that is there, and then open Notepad, and you see I already did it there, but copy paste everything so that way you can easily take out parts of that script that you enjoy and use it directly into your model. This way you'll save a lot of time and unnecessary typing. You'll find documentation on our website. So there you'll find what rules are, how to write it, how to use it, and what are the best practices. And we also link to documentation online for Lua scripting, because rules are based on Lua scripting syntax, so it can be a great way to start if you want to learn how to write it. Let's start with a very simple scene. So I'm just going to add a trunk for now in there. So add geometry trunk, and you'll find the rules panel on the right side of your window. If you don't find it, you can go into window and click on the rules panel and it should appear. You can enable and disable it, and at the top you'll see all the mistake you're gonna do writing your script the first time. So the first thing I want to do here is to create a rule for the height of my trunk. So the rules need at least two lines to work. One line that defines the rule slider, and one line that uses the value of the rule to edit the model. First, I'm writing a name for my rule, then I'm defining the rule. So I'm gonna write rule, and then what I'm doing is giving the slider that I'm creating a name. Then I'm writing the current value, so the value that the slider will be on, and then the gauge of the slider, so it's going to go from 0 to 2. So if I click on the viewport, then I see that my slider appears. It goes from 0 to 2. Because we want to keep things organized, we're gonna add a title to that rules section. So just before the height that is in between brackets, I'm gonna add a title, then shape, 2 points height. And if I click now, you see that we have shape and followed by the height rule. And if I go ahead and change the name of my rule or something like blah, you see that nothing's appear in the bottom. So that's really just for the script. But let's give meaningful names to everything because it's gonna be much simpler. For now, that slider doesn't do anything. So I need to get the property that I want to change. So I'm going to my spine section and then on the absolute property, and we have some options there. So we could copy the name of the property for the script, we could edit the line for the script, or we could copy a block for script, but that's too easy. I'm gonna come back to that later. So for now, let's just copy the line for script. So there it is copied, and then I can paste it into my script. Let me explain what we just pasted there. First, we have what we want to do. So we have set property value. Then we have the affected node, which is trunk. Then we have the name of the property, which is in spine, length, and absolute value. And then we have the value itself. So here, if I just take the height, copy and paste it instead of the value, and then click on the next side, you'll see that my trunk will now be from 0 to 2. These are the values we already entered. But this is not what we want, right? It looks pretty weird. So for example, if I change the values so that when I open this, it's at 10, and then let's say something more in the range of 5 to 45, and then click next to it. Now my height will go from 5 to 45. It is important to note that whatever you enter in your rules will have priority over the values you entered directly in the properties before. So make sure you take note of what you had before so you don't lose your work. Or you could have two scenes. Now that we understand how to build a really basic block, let's add some elegance into this. So I'm gonna bring back the slider to values that are more normal. So that's something that goes from 0 to 1. So it's easier to understand in our menu. And then I'm going to create a do-end block. So when you create a do-end block, you can create variables that will only be valid between those two words, so do and end. So first, I'm going to create a local variable. So I'm writing local to specify that I only want this variable to be valid in this block, and then I'm going to give a name to that variable. I'm calling it final height. And then I'm going to define what is that variable. For this one, we'll use a matlarp. A matlarp is the interpolated float result between two float values. So it means it's going to go from value A through value B using a third value in a straight line. Once you see the slider, it will become much easier to understand. What I'm writing there is I want the value to go from 5 to 45 using the height slider as the way to define where we are between those two values. So I'm just taking my height variable and then copying it there. Then I'm closing. Note that if you're using a matlarp, the value by which the 5 and the 45 will be interpolated between each other is clamped to 0, 1. So you could not have a slider that goes from 1 to 50, for example. And we're ready for the next step. So now what we have is a value that is going to be final height. And this is what we want as, well, the value of the property. So I'm going to take that local variable and replace what I had before with its name. So now when we go into the slider, if I enter 0 in the slider, it goes to 5. And if I enter 1 in the slider, it goes to 45. So you see we have the slider that is height, and it uses the value of the local variable final height. There are a bunch of declaration you could use. Matlarp is a declaration, but for this intro tutorial, we're gonna be mostly focusing on this. If you want to do more and have all kind of funky stuff happening in there, just go look at the Lua learning documentation, and also we'll be releasing another tutorial that will help you with that. Now I would like us to take a minute to think about absolute and relative values. For this, I'm just adding a branch generator, so branch big. And here, if I change the height of the trunk, you see that the length of the branches is changing with the height of my trunk. That is because we're using a relative value inside the branches properties. So let's add another branch generator, and now if I do the same thing, the twigs are becoming bigger and bigger. But maybe we don't want that. What if we wanted the twigs to remain the same length throughout? So for this, I would change the relative value of the length and put that to 0 and instead use the absolute value. So this can be really helpful if you have, for example, stems for your leaves and you know that you don't want them to become longer because it would look kind of ridiculous. So that way you can play with absolute and relative value. So now when I increase the height of the trunk, the twig stays the same, but the branches get longer. The same goes for curves. So curves have also relative and absolute values. To demonstrate that, I'm going to add another rule to our script, one that will determine the first boundary of the branches. But first, I'm tidying up the script a bit, so I'm adding comments. To do that, I'm doing dash dash, then writing something. And this will not be considered in the actions of the script. So I'm just adding rules, main, and then naming my things. So we have the height rule, and then I'm going to name the other one branch start. Then I'm defining my rule, so it's going to be branch start, rule. I don't want this to be in shape. And then I'm naming it branch start. And my slider will go from 0. Well, we'll start at 0.5. We'll go from 0 to 1. Then I can define what it will actually do. So I'm adding do, then local, final, start. And this is going to be a matlarp again. And I want this to go from 0 to 0.9. And then I'm taking my rule. Then I'm going into the branches parameters, boundaries first, copy edit line for script. Then I can paste it in my script. And then I'm changing the value for my local variable. So copy, paste. And then I just need to add an end. Then if I click on the side, we have the new slider that changes the boundaries of the branches. So you see now I can make it start at 0 or 0.9. But what if I want branches to be smaller at the bottom of the trunk? So first I'm going to change my curve and change the length of the branches according to the trunk. So this is what I want. This is great. I'm going to change the skin as well because I think smaller branches should be thinner. So I'm doing the same, decreasing the radius according to the trunk. And now if I move the slider, we can see that the little branches are starting up higher in the tree as well. That's because we're using relative curves. So what relative curves do is that the start of the curve is going to correspond to the first entity we have in our trunk. So as we move the boundary higher, the first branches is also higher. But what I would like to do is really leave those small, frail branches at the bottom of the trunk. So for that, I'm going to change the curve from relative to absolute. And now we see we don't have the little branches at the top anymore. Well, I need to change it for the skin as well, so there. So now when I move the slider down, the little branches are only at the bottom of my trunk. And that is because when you set your curve to absolute, the start of the curve will always be the point 0 on the parent. So this can be a great way to use absolute and relative curl when you're using rules. So be conscious of that, so you can always come back and forth between absolute and relative if you're unsure. Since we're on the subject of curves, I would really recommend leaving crazy curves alone for scripts. For example, what I mean with crazy curve is if I just go there and choose the draw option and then do this. So it might look really great when you're working on your model because you don't see all those spikes on those curves. But when you add rules in the mix, it can become very hard to know what is happening. So leave your curve simple, and that way it's way more predictable. The next subject I want to tackle is generator's name. So first I'm just adding a new trunk generator and renaming the same as the other one, so trunk. Now I'll just move it on the side so we can see it. So we have the same name, and if I move the height slider, you see that both generators will be modified by the slider, and that's because they have the same name. You can avoid that by right-clicking in the generation window and choosing Make All Generator Names Unique. This will add a number to all the generators that have the same name. So by default, when you add a new generator in the generation window, it will add that number, but maybe you rename some things, so yeah, that can be a very useful tool. That being said, you might want multiple generators to be affected by the same rule, so it's a tactic you can use in your script if you want many things to be modified at the same time. Lastly, I want to show you what the third option does when you right-click on a property. So copy simple block for script. If I copy and then paste it in my script, you see that everything is done for you. So you just need to change the names of a few things in there. Like you have the rule name, and then you'll have final value that's there. Maybe you want something other than that. And what I will do is create a range and add it to your current value or remove it depending on where you are on the slider. So you could be using only the simple blocks throughout all your script, and it's going to work and it's going to be very fast. So if I just take another one, for example, and then copy them, there you see we still have rule name. So you need to change that to not cause an error. So what I need to do there is change the name of the slider. I'm calling it late noise for this case. Then I can change the rule name by the one I gave. So I'm going to write late noise. And then if I click on the side, it's going to work. Okay, so my values are very low, so you don't see it. I'm just going to make it a little bit more obvious. So if I change my range to 2, now we see it. So we have late noise that is being added to that trunk. And with that, we're ready to jump on a more exciting scene. So we have this model here. So today we'll see how to change the height and also how to affect the force that is applied on a generator. We also have the branch spread. So this will be a little more complex. So when I make the branch smaller, you see that they are going upright. And when I make them longer, they are going towards the ground as if they were heavier. So we'll play with curves for that. It will be really, really fun. And also in our script, we have some checkboxes for the roots and the mushrooms. So if you click on that, you can remove some of the details. If I move closer, we see we can remove the mushrooms. And also we'll add some broken branches in there. Before we get into the rules, I want to show you how I made this scene so you can make one yourself. It's pretty simple. So if we go over the materials, you can see that the leaves are just a regular noise that you can choose in the drop-down menu here. And then I did some color adjustment and added an opacity map that is super simple. So just to have the feeling of leaves over there. And then if we take a look at the mushrooms, so those mushrooms are simply a trunk generator with a cap one. To get that shape for the cap, you only need a decreasing curve like this. We have an example of mushroom in our samples if you would like to look at that. And for the mushroom on the trunk, let me just move the light so we can see better. So those are just branch generators simply. So their length is very short and the radius is large. And if we take a look at the displacement, so to get that cute little silhouette, I added a bit of fine displacement and then added some flares also to get that nice light detail underneath. And then if we take a look at the texture, so the top part are the circles at the top and you see the white border. And then for the lines underneath, it's just the bottom part of the texture. So that's how I made the pieces in there. So now we're ready to look at the rules. I'll just put everything back to the middle so I get my basic model there. Because like I said, whatever you enter into the rules, it's gonna have priority over what you set in the properties beforehand. So now that that is done, we can remove all of that script and start over again. So now everything is fresh, we don't have any sliders, so we can begin. So what I like to do is open one of our samples. I'm gonna take the conifer one. If I go into learning, there we have the model. And then we can copy paste part that we like from there. So what I want to take are the comments that keep everything clean. I want to have global shape and a bit of the canopy. So I'm just copy pasting it into my own scene. I'm gonna remove season because I didn't set any. And I'm going to copy the randomize rule. If you take a look, you see that the generator name there is trunk. So it's gonna work in my scene because my trunk is also named trunk. So it's gonna work there. So if you want to copy paste rules behavior directly, make sure that you change the names of your generators because it's not going to work if you don't do it otherwise. So now if we take a look at what we have randomize, we have height, trunk width, and branch spread. So if I move the sliders now, nothing is happening because I didn't define any of the rules. Just gonna close that and then we can begin our work. So the first thing I'm going to add is the height. Same thing as we did before in the super simple scene. I'm just going to establish what is the rule. So I'm adding a do, then creating a local variable. So I'm naming this final height. Then I'm defining what this variable value will be. So I'm making a mathrp. Now I'm taking a look at the properties to know what is my current length for the trunk. So if I go into spine, we see that I had a percentage of parent. We don't want that. This is weird. I'm just going to remove it. And we see we're at 43. And I'm going to do a mathrp that will start at 15 and go all the way to 50. And then I'm taking height as the interpolating value. So just copy pasting the name of my rule there. And I can close that. And then I need to go take my property line edit. So I'm just copying edit line for script, pasting it there. And if you remember, I just have to copy my local variable and paste it into the value number, and then add an end to finish that little block. So now if I move the height slider, we can see that we go from a super small tree to a big one. Remember when I talked about absolute versus relative? Well, this is important in this scene because if you look at the way I built this tree, I have little spines that are the anchors for my leaves to create this kind of cloud shape, and I didn't want them to grow bigger with the tree because I quite like this compact look, so I use an absolute value for that. And the branches, they are relative, so they will grow with the trunk. Okay, so now we're ready to do the same with trunk width. I'm going to go faster there because it's exactly the same process. But as I check the current value I have in my properties, it could be a good idea to test the range of what you want to do with that rule. So here I'm testing what it looks like when it's thin, when it's big, so that way I know what I want in my MATLAB. Then I can test my slider, and then I noticed those little twigs, they were annoying to me, so I reduced the length. Now we'll add a rule that controls the wind blown. So basically it's going to control how much a force has an effect on the generator. So if we take a look at this scene, into the trunk, into the forces, you see that I called it a wind force, but it's basically just a direction. So if I remove it, it becomes straight, and if I activate it, it's leaning towards one side. So we're gonna add a rule to control that. So first, I'm establishing what is my slider and my rule name. So a trunk bend, and then it's a rule. Then I'm going to add that in shape. I'm just gonna copy paste the line. Rule of thumb, you can copy paste a lot of things. You just need to remember to change the names in there. So I'm changing the name to wind blown, and the slider is fine. So I'm gonna leave it as that. So now we have the slider, but I'll have it start at 0.5 because I want to have a lean when we open the scene. Okay, so now I can define what is my rule. So I'm gonna add a comment and identify what I'm about to do. So the trunk bend, and then I'm adding a do, and I'm creating a local variable that I will call final trunk bend. And the same way it's going to be a MATLAB. So MATLAB, and then I'm defining what are the values of that. So if I look into my trunk and then the forces, we'll see that my medium point is approximately 0.4. So I can go from 0 because I want it to go completely straight if I want to directly from the rules, and then go to 0.8. Then I'm taking the rule value and adding that into my MATLAB, closing. Then the same way I can copy the property line for the strength of a force. Then I simply need to change the value with my local variable, and then if I click end and click on the side, this will be applied to our trunk. My trunk is looking really sad when it's when it's straight, so I should probably add a little bit of noise in there so it doesn't look as boring. I'm just gonna change that. And now if I change the slider, we see that we have a force affecting a generator. We are ready for the more complex rule, the branch spread. The first thing I want to affect with this rule is the length of the branches. So first I'm adding a comment to make sure everything is clean. Then starting my block with a do. Then creating my local variable, final branch spread, and a MATLAB. Then I'll test what are the values I want for this. It seems good. We'll do 0.2 to 0.8. Then I can take my rule name and add it in there and close my lerp. Then I'm defining the property value and copying the local variable into there. And if we test the slider, it's working. But this is not all I want to do with that rule. I want the gravity to increase as well as I move that slider. So I'm going to create a MATLAB too, but for the gravity. So I'll be working in the same block, the same undo. So I'm just putting my local variable in between and I'm calling it final gravity. Then I'm creating another MATLAB. And then I'm looking at the value that is in the property right now. I can make it go from minus 0.11 to 0.3. So yeah, you can have negative values in there. And since it's gravity, it's inverted. So it's going to go from the minus is going to go up and the positive is going to go down. Then I'm taking the same rule as before, branch spread for the value there. Then I can copy the set property value and enter it here. And then I just need to change the local variable for the value. There you go. And if we click on the side, we see that something is wrong because now everything is grayed out. So at the top, it says that it's near line 54. And if I look closer, I see that it's missing a comma between the 0.3 and the branch spread. So I'm just going to add that there and then it's working. And now we can test the slider. So if I go longer, we have gravity happening. And if we go shorter, it moves towards the top. But I have to say I'm not a fan of what's happening with those branches. The silhouette is kind of weird. It's because I have a profile curve that goes into both values. So at the tip of my branches, it goes up again. But I think it looks kind of odd when the branches are very long, but it's looking great when it's short. So we're gonna do a lerp for curves. First, I'm just adding a comment to make sure everything is clean. Then I can go into my branches properties and into that profile curve. And if I right click, I can copy the curve for script. Then I can paste it in my script. And this corresponds exactly to what I had drawn in there. So all the points are there. I just need to give it a name that is not just curve. So I'm going to add an A next to all the curve. This is very important. Do not add something just in the first curve. You need to add it everywhere. And now I'm going to shape the branches to the final result I want into the rules. So I'm just going to move the points around till we have something that goes more towards the ground without that little flip. Then I can copy the curve for the script and paste it into there. And then I'll name that one curve B. So again, I'm adding B to all those curve words. Oops, not at the right place, curve B. Now that we've established what our two curves are, we can create a mat lerp between those two. Well, it's going to be a curve lerp really. So it's going to merge from curve A to curve B. So for this, again, I'm creating a local variable. So I'm going to call that final gravity profile curve. And then it's going to be a little different. So it's going to be a lerp underscore curve underscore to underscore curve. And then I'm opening curve A, curve B, because I want to lerp from curve A to curve B, so the same principle applies. Then I'm going to take the rule name, branch spread, and add it there. And then I can close. And then I need to set the property. So for this, I'm copying the edit line for script, but I'll need to make a few changes there. So we see we have set property value. We need to change that. So it's the curve that's going to change. So I'm changing it for profile, set property profile. Then I can take the local variable and paste it there. And then you don't see it, but I see at the top of my screen that there's an error somewhere, so I need to find what it is. And I spy with my little eyes that there's a capital C missing next to curve A. So you need to be very precise with your name. Even capitals are important. So now if I go check that slider and look at those profile curves, we see that it is set. Hooray! So we're good for that curve. If I look at the beginning of the slider, we also have these other funky curves happening. So we have a lerp from curve. I'll grant you the difference is really subtle, but you might find a use case where it's more visible than that. Now let's do the same for the parent curve, because I would like to have a different behavior between the tip of the tree and the bottom branches. So for that, I'm going to have the same strategy. I'm going into the properties, and then I want the curve to be maxed out when it's at the beginning of the slider. So I'm pasting that there, and I'm giving a unique name. So I'm going to name this curve C and add the C everywhere. Okay, now I'm going to decide how I want the second curve to be. So I want the curve to be a linear decay for when the gravity is having effect. So now I copied that. I can give it a unique name again. So curve D. Then I create a local variable, as always. And I'll call that final. I'll just copy paste what I have. So it's going to be easier. So it's just copy and then paste that. But I'll change profile for parent. And then I'll change it for curve C to curve D. And then it's going to be set property parent. Here we go. And I'll change the local variable for parent so it fits. But there's something special with parent curve because we have levels there. So if I take a look at there, you see that first level is extension, 2 is trunk, 3 is tree. I want this curve to have effect on the first level. So I need to specify that in the script. So for that, right after the name of the property, I'll add an 1 and that is set. That's all I had to do. So now at the beginning of the slider, I have my maxed out curve, and at the tip of the slider, boom, the linear decay. There's one last thing I want to add in this rule script, and these are details. So I'm gonna add another section, and I'm gonna call it detail. And what I want to do here is to have a toggle switch for the roots and the mushroom on the trunk. So first I'm creating the menu, and now it's a little different. Instead of rule, it's going to be rule_check, and that's going to create a checkbox. Then we can create the name of the checkbox and the section in which it's going to be, the same as always. Then we specify the state of that checkbox. So I want it to be true. It means it's going to be checked. And now if I click on the side, we see we have our checkbox. I'm going to do the same for the mushroom. So mushroom trunk. Then again, rule check. Then entering the name of the section and the name of the checkbox and putting the status, which is true. And now if we look at the rules below, we see we have a checkbox for the mushroom. So to execute both those rules, we'll need an if statement. So an if statement works with an then part and an else part. So it goes, if something is happening, then this is the state. So it executes the then part or its else part accordingly to the if statement. So we'll try to do that together. It sounds complicated, but it's really, really not. So for this, I'm writing if opening bracket roots, the name of the rule, is true. It's the equal sign. Then something is going to happen. So in that case, it means that the roots are enabled. I need to go into my projector for roots because yes, I didn't say, but the roots are projected directly on the trunk. I think it's a great way to add that detail to a tree. So I'm copying the edit line for the status of the projector, and for the value, it's the state. We have two states for that. We have enabled and disabled. So the first state is 0, enabled. And we're going to add an else part, else. Then I'm copying the same line again because we want to set the property value. And value, meaning the state, is going to be 1. So if roots is checked, then it means we see it. If it's not checked, we don't see it. That's what we wrote in that script. So now let's test it. I'm just gonna place the projector so we can see it better. So now we see the roots. So if I uncheck it, boom, the roots are gone. So it works. So now we can do the same thing for the mushrooms. So I'm just gonna copy already the name of my rule. And I'm going down, adding another comment to keep things clean, mushrooms. Then I can write if, opening brackets, mushroom trunk check, equal true, closing brackets, then, and it's going to be the same thing. So I'm going into the projector for the mushrooms, copying the edit line for script, and then pasting it in my code. So set property value, and the status is going to be 0. And then I can just copy that line because we only need to change a number. Else, pasting the line and changing the status to 1. But there I forgot to write 1, so I just put 0 with both places. So I'm gonna add 1 there, and now it's working. And now to finish this script, I'm going to add a rule for broken branches. The first thing I want to make sure is that I have caps in my generation window next to the branch I want to break, and they are set to breaks only, which is perfect because we don't want an open tube when the branch is going to break. It would look kind of weird. So now that we have that, we can add a new rule, and it's going to be a rule like we used to have before. So it's not a rule check, it's just a simple rule. And then we'll create a MATLAB for this and add the property values. Now if we click on the side, we see our new rule, well, our new slider appeared in our menu, which is great. So this is it for this model. What a journey, right? So now that you're familiar with basic concept of rules, you can start creating your own and have fun with your models.